This is Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. We went through almost a whole hour without talking about the Supreme Court, and there is a lot of Supreme Court news this week. We had a chance to sit down with David Schoen. You may remember him from a few months back. We spoke with him. He is an attorney for the ACLU of Alabama. You can check out his direct site at schoenlawfirm.com, and you could, of course, follow ACLU of Alabama at aclualabama.com and on Twitter at ACLU Alabama. We're going to play for you our interview we had with David about his reaction to the Supreme Court's ruling on the Voting Rights Act. Here it is. We're speaking with David Schoen. He is an amazing attorney working with the ACLU of Alabama. The ACLU of Alabama was influential in getting the Voting Rights Act case before the Supreme Court. David, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
We wanted to speak with you after this week's ruling, just to get your thoughts and to figure out where we go from here. Were you surprised by the court's decision when it came to the Voting Rights Act case?
I wasn't shocked, and I think that when one reads the opinion, it's really read from a sort of, I think, an agenda-driven standpoint, let's say. And I don't mean to be unfair to the court. I'm sure the Chief Justice would say that he put a great deal of thought and effort into the sort of legal parameters of the decision, but it seems to me that it was relatively predictable to go along the lines that it ended up going. I just think that it's unprecedented in some ways. It's unprecedented for this court to treat Congress in the manner in which it treated it. This is supposed to be a court that shows deference toward the legislative process, and in carving out some sort of extraordinary level of legislation test that they did here. In other words, Chief Justice Roberts took issue with the dissent, belittling the dissent for suggesting this is nothing more than an ordinary piece of legislation. First of all, the dissent didn't say that, but secondly, the question of deference to Congress doesn't turn on the importance of the legislation. Quite the opposite, frankly. I mean, once we have a system that gives deference to the legislative process, then the importance of the legislation ought to favor that deference to an even greater degree, it seems to me. But anyway, it's a long-winded way of answering your question, whether I was surprised. Unfortunately, I wasn't shocked by it. I was disappointed that the court took this case in the first place because I thought it was a pretty straightforward question. I thought that Shelby County was wrong in its challenge, and I thought that the lower court decisions were right. I thought that the dissent in this case by Justice Ginsburg, joined by Justices Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan, was really extraordinary. Beautiful piece of writing, and I thought really hit every relevant issue in this case that put the Chief Justice's opinion to shame, quite frankly.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I was inspired by her quoting Dr. Martin Luther King in the Arc of Justice. It really seemed like she was channeling, I think, what you and I are feeling, and probably, many other Americans and people watching around the world, that you don't take steps backwards when it comes to civil rights.
I think you're exactly right. And I have to say, I mean, you put it beautifully then, say many other Americans. To me, her opinion is a real American's opinion. It's an opinion that speaks to the history of this country. It's an opinion that speaks to where this country, where the founders at least wanted this country to be, and where I think right-thinking Americans want the country to move, the direction in which right-thinking Americans want the country to move in. And it's very important, I think. And she really, as I don't use the word shame lightly, but I do think that she puts the Chief Justice's decision to shame and that particular viewpoint. Because after all, it seems to me at least, this is my take, and I'm not sure I can be completely objective since I'm involved with the case, but I read the Chief Justice's opinion, joined in by the others, as a sort of gut reaction to this issue. It's a reaction that some people on the street have. Well, times have really changed. Look, we've got an African-American president, and we've elected African American legislators in some of these pre-cleared states that are subject to Section 5 pre-clearance, and sort of what do you people want kind of thing. That's the way I read it, and I don't think I'm being unfair. And of course, Justice Ginsburg says, well, wait a minute, we got where we are because of the Voting Rights Act to a large degree, but beyond all of that, we're not where we want to be. And she provides, as we did in our brief, a good deal of evidence as to ongoing trickery, nothing less than that, but trickery in many of these states to dilute minority votes, limited only by the degree of cleverness in the imagination of a legislator who wants to dilute minority vote. And she gives some anecdotal evidence from Alabama, some of which surfaced in a recent criminal case, tape-recorded phone calls from legislators using the N-word and all sorts of things that still reflect, unfortunately, it's not just Alabama, of course, many states around the country. And it's true that it's not just states subject to pre-clearance where this kind of agenda exists. But the fact is, these states were carved out based on legislative findings that they were the areas in which this was the greatest problem.
Right.
But go ahead.
These were the worst of the worst when it came to racial discrimination. I just want to remind everybody, we're speaking with David Schoen. He is an attorney. He worked with the ACLU of Alabama and was influential in the Voting Rights Act, the fight before the Supreme Court. Do you think that there's a chance we could expand this? You were just talking about other states that weren't subject to preclearance, but we also saw such racial discrimination. Is this an opportunity to say, fine, then all states, all counties should be subject to some checks and balances to make sure people aren't losing their right to vote?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. I really appreciate the optimist's point of view and looking at this as an opportunity.
I'm trying.
No, look, I mean, there's something to what you say, because what the court said is, let's put this back in the lap of the Congress. The problem is, most experts, far more expert than I, say that this is a difficult Congress to get anything meaningful passed in. Now, look, what the Chief Justice and folks like that would say is, oh, well, there are checks and balances. You've got Section 2, and Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act allows people voters on a case-by-case basis to bring a challenge in federal court against this new practice. Let me just give a broader picture. What happens in these states is some clever legislator comes up with a new method for diluting minority vote, and what Congress had said with the Voting Rights Act under Sections 4 and 5 is that any such change in these states that have been identified as historical bedrocks of discrimination in voting, in these states you have to have any such changes pre-cleared. And the court, Chief Justice Roberts, characterizes those as any innocuous, no matter how innocuous, and that sort of thing. Well, they weren't innocuous, or these legislators wouldn't have spent their time on them. But that's right. Because we're suspicious, any change that's going to affect voting had to be pre-cleared. So the alternative would be, and that's what we're left with Section 2, the state makes the change, and then someone has to bring an individual action against it. But as we said in our brief, and as the court recognizes, these are very expensive, and the potentially discriminatory practice would have been in effect for maybe an entire election cycle before the challenge is heard. So it's a very inefficient and expensive way to proceed. But, you said in the opening, where do we go from here? And that's, of course, the big question. We've already regrouped a little bit. I was in touch with a colleague on this case who I really view as one of the experts in this field, Lachlan McDonald of the ACLU's Voting Rights Project in Atlanta. And I said, Lachlan, I'm ready to go to work. I mean, we've got to hit the trenches now. In my view, there has to be a battle on two fronts. We have to really consider bringing some Section 2 cases now in a meaningful, pinpointed, targeted way, the most efficient as possible, to bring to light any discriminatory practices that we think ought to be highlighted. And secondly, at Congress, there's got to be some action in Congress to show them why it's in everyone's interest. And quite frankly, we may have seen it today a little bit with the immigration bill that passed the Senate. It does seem that people in Congress, at least the most recent election, got their attention as to the impact of the minority vote in this country, so that it can't be ignored anymore.
Absolutely.
We'll have to see what happens now. We'll have to see what happens. But I really would commend to every American's attention the dissent by Justice Ginsburg in this case, because in my view she tracks every relevant issue here, including the history of it, the need for the Voting Rights Act, the impact the Voting Rights Act had, the evidence that there's still a need for it today, and then, of course, and this is what I really think is a great shame of the Roberts decision, again, from their perspective, this one of deference to a legislature. As Justice Ginsburg pointed out, and as we pointed out in our brief, this Congress amassed an overwhelming record in renewing the Voting Rights Act this time around. The vote was bipartisan. The record of evidence requiring it was absolutely overwhelming, maybe even to an unprecedented degree. And so when Congress made those findings, that's the kind of determination that deserves great deference, because after all, we're talking about the fundamental right to vote. And, Chief Justice, one might say, said it all in one line in his opinion. I think Justice Ginsburg suggested that in her opening and dissent, and that is that there is no doubt that discrimination in voting still exists today. So if there is no doubt about that, and usually we allow, his exact quote was, voting discrimination still exists, semicolon, no one doubts that. That's from the Chief Justice, signed on by all of the justices, and in one form or another. So if that's the case, that's the kind of issue that we want our Congress to try to address with all of the tools available to them, and that's what they did here. And so now they say, throwing it back in their lap for something else, I think it was a gut agenda-type decision. And we really have to think about, and great minds have to get together, so where we go from here, how to deal with this thing, how to do everything in our power. And I suggest to you, as you well know, it's in every citizen's interest to do everything in his or her power to combat discrimination in the right to vote. It's the single most important constitutional right that we hold, from which all other rights flow, I would suggest.
I think those are impeccable words, at how vital our right to vote is. I really want to thank you, and I just want to add, the words of Ginsburg from her dissent here, that throwing out the preclearance, when it has worked, as Scalia tried to point out, when it has worked and is continuing to work to stop discriminatory changes, is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you are not getting wet. She was inspiring in this case and many others this week. And David, you are inspiring to talk to. And with people like you working on this issue, I have hope that it will be resolved again. So thank you very much for taking time with us and all of the important and amazing work you do.
Thank you. You do a great service with this program. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I just want to say, I think that was the most brilliant performance ever in the history of everything.
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
My name is Joe Thompson. I'm 29 years old and I have a career that I love as a systems analyst. Career. It still sounds cool to say that word. I never could have gotten on this path without a college degree. And if the college me were here, he'd tell you.
I never would have gotten to college without Big Brothers Big Sisters. I could have ended up anywhere, on the streets even. But college? Joe Thompson? Not likely. My big brother helped me out. He taught me I could do anything, at a time when a lot of people were saying just the opposite.
And to a 7-year-old, that means a lot. My big brother's name is Phil. And Phil is the reason that this 7-year-old grows up to be a systems analyst.
Whether you donate money or time, you're helping Big Brothers Big Sisters help a child. And that can last a lifetime. Start something today at bigbrothersbigsisters.org. Brought to you by Big Brothers Big Sisters and the Ad Council.
Yo, word on the street is they got an NSA mixtape bike ride going down July 4th, 5 o'clock at WEAC Radio, 1918 Martin Luther King Avenue in Southeast Anacostia, Washington, D.C. But you ain't heard this from me, man. They got us on the run, man. Whistleblowers on the run. They already got my man Michael Hastings. They blew his car up. They got him. You know, Eric Snowden's on the run. They got WikiLeaks stuck up in the Ecuador embassy. Can't go nowhere. I mean, man, Joe, you know what time it is, man. They got your emails. They got your phones. They got everything, man. So don't fax this. Don't send this out. Just word of mouth, man. Keep it on the low. But you ain't heard it from me, man. July 4th, 5 o'clock. At WEAC Radio, 1918, Martin Luther King Avenue, Southeast, Anacostia, Washington, D.C., man. Massive bike ride, man. We're going to blow the whistle on these motherfuckers. Man, you do something, man. But you ain't heard from me, man. I got to go, man. Do something.
Hey there, Matthew Filipovich here, host of the creatively titled Matthew Filipovich Show, which, by the way, you can hear every single Saturday right here on 1480 AM We Act Radio. Now, I'm going to be honest with you people, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I like talking to smart people who are smarter than me, some of the smartest, funniest, most badass progressives out there. People like Glenn Greenwald, Naomi Klein, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, Jamie Kilstein, Allison Kilkenny, Alan Grayson, Jeremy Scahill, Jim Hightower, and more. That's right, I said more. Don't believe me? Well, tune into the Matthew Filipovich Show every single Saturday for some of the best in liberal talk, news, comedy, and interviews right here on 1480 AM We Act Radio.
Friends, David Schuster here, and all of us at We Act Radio are so proud of our neighbors here in Southeast D.C., especially one of our partners, the Arc. The Arc is at 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast. It's the home to some of Washington's best, including the Washington Ballet, the Levine School of Music, Boys and Girls Club, and the Children's Health Project. All provide a number of programs and services within the very same facility. The Arc is also home to the Arc Theater, the only theater east of the river, which hosts a variety of dance, music, and theatrical shows each year. Almost everything you could want is at the Arc, so stop by and see them. The Arc, 1901 Mississippi Avenue in Southeast. For more information, visit the Arc's website, www.thearcdc.org, or call 202-889-5901. The Arc, part of Southeast D.C.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Thank you wherever you're checking us out, by the way. We Act Radio, so Flow Radio, or maybe checking out the podcast. And big thanks to David Schoen for all of his amazing work, despite the result on the Voting Rights Act case before the Supreme Court.
Sounds like they're going to keep fighting, which I like.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like he's given up anytime soon.
No,
and
no. Nor should anybody.
Yeah, it sounds like Eric Holder will also be joining that fight. News broke this week after the Supreme Court released that ruling that, Eric Holder's not giving up on this.
Right. Now, you guys got into a lot of it, but there's a couple sections to the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
4 was struck down, therefore making 5 essentially impotent. There is still Section 2. And you remember that, especially when Joe Madison interviewed the president and asked him specifically about this before the decision, obviously, and I think even before the argument, the president said, we still have Section 2. Now, Section 2 isn't as good. In fact, honestly, it kind of sucks because Section 2 allows you to sue, but the voting law is already in place. And the election can go on, in the court case that's battling the voting law could get resolved months, years later after the election has already been done and the damage and the discrimination has been done.
Right. I mean, we saw with other cases before the Supreme Court that in order to sue, you have to have standing. Well, you have to be able to show that you were harmed.
Right.
In order to bring the case before a court. So these lawsuits can't occur until after somebody is harmed.
And with Republican court packing, and a lot of them in the state courts, actually these would be federal actions, but Republican court packing, especially in the South, you're going to get judges down there who probably are sympathetic to voter ID laws, et cetera. But Eric Holder's not giving up, and he first called out the Supreme Court for saying, how dare you substitute your opinion for that of Congress when the Constitution says it's up to Congress to do this. So I want to play a couple clips of his response.
Go for it.
After extensive hearings, Sections 4 and 5 of this important law were reauthorized, most recently in 2006, just 7 years ago, with the unanimous support of the United States Senate and the near unanimous support of the House of Representatives. This is a uniquely legislative function and responsibility that the Constitution expressly gave to Congress.
Uniquely legislative, expressly to Congress. In other words, not you, Chief Justice Roberts and conservative cohorts.
And, Eric Holder has every right to be angry about this after how hard he fought personally to keep some of these laws from disenfranchising
the voter ID laws in
voters.
Texas, the voter ID laws, was it Virginia or Pennsylvania? Virginia. Battled and won them both, and then within a day after this decision, they're right back at it.
Right.
And you remember the Supreme Court said, well, the problem isn't as bad anymore. This is Holder's response to that.
These are just two of many examples demonstrating that these problems have not been consigned to history. They continue to exist. Their effects are real. They are of today, not yesterday, and they corrode the foundations of our democracy.
So he's going to keep fighting, and here it is.
Let me be very clear. We will not hesitate to take swift enforcement action using every legal tool that remains to us against any jurisdiction that seeks to take advantage of the Supreme Court's ruling by hindering eligible citizens' full and free exercise of the franchise.
Keep fighting.
I know. With folks like Eric Holder, with David Schoen and the ACLU, and all of these really strong, powerful people and voices on this issue, it stands a chance of, and
when you have conservatives like Jim Sensenbrenner, who Republican helped put together the 2006 reauthorization, saying, let's do it again.
Yeah, he said the Voting Rights Act is America's commitment to never again permit racial prejudices in the electoral process. And this re-effort will require members from both sides of the aisle to put partisan politics aside and ensure Americans' most sacred right is protected. So,
right. As Mitch McConnell says, I haven't read the decision yet. I don't know. In other words, I don't want to do anything. But I think we should push and include places like Wisconsin and Ohio who are doing these things, that it is broader. And this second generation of voter discrimination, as Justice Ginsburg called it.
Yeah, well,
they aren't literacy tests or things like that. They've just morphed into something new.
Right, because they're also discriminating against the poor in general, not just against.
They're discriminating against Democrats. Let's just people who vote Democratic.
Right,
Period.
But I think just as we saw in 2012, where when people thought that right was under attack, they came out with a vengeance, higher percentages of voters than we had pretty much ever seen in recent times.
Right here on Talking Left.
Right.
And let's do it again.
I think that we should do it again and use this as an opportunity to expand the Voting Rights Act so that everybody in every state in our nation is protected and their democratic process is not taken away. We're going to come back with more Supreme Court news, DOMA and Prop 8, and our great friend Zack Ford of LGBT Think Progress. Stick around.
This is going to be fun.
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
It goes back to the fundamentals, intoned a Wall Street analyst. The economy is improving. Improving for whom? By fundamentals, he means the high-flying stock market, booming corporate profits, and top executive pay. Those are signs of an economy that is top-heavy, not healthy. In fact, our economy is teetering dangerously because it's not sustained from below by a strong middle class. Economist Paul Krugman notes that far from improving, our economy remains in a low-grade depression. Of course, that thermometer zooms to a high grade if you're among the millions of Americans who are jobless, working for low wages, or able to get only part-time temporary employment. Yes, the unemployment rate has ticked down, but not because of any jump in job creation. Rather, the dismal lack of hiring has become so discouraging that many people simply give up the hunt, which magically removes them from the ranks of the unemployed. Most Congress critters clearly don't care about America's middle-class jobs depression. The White House cares, but doesn't treat it as the crisis it is, so nothing happens. The only jobs push we've had is the stopgap effort by the Federal Reserve to pump enough money into the economy to keep unemployment from worsening. But rather than push harder, Ben Bernanke, head of the central bank, recently sounded retreat. He, too, uses the faulty unemployment statistic as a crutch to claim improvement. The jobless rate, he says, could drop to 7% next year, so the Fed's stimulus will no longer be needed. This is Jim Hightower saying that's shameful. Even if that was the true rate, 7% equals 11 million unemployed Americans and many millions more who would still be underemployed. From Bernanke to Congress, all government officials who shrug their shoulders and give up on helping that many Americans should themselves be made jobless.
If you'd like more of Jim Hightower's real populism, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter gives you the real lowdown on which corporations, by name, are doing what to the middle class, our environment, and our democracy. Each month, the Hightower Lowdown brings you facts you didn't know, along with actions you can take to fight back. It also comes with a sense of humor. Hightower believes we can fight the gods and still have fun. Plus, get this, it's cheap. Only $15 brings you 12 issues a year. For real populism, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. The AFL-CIO says the U.S. Supreme Court Defense of Marriage Act and California Prop 8 decisions marks a major moment in American history for equality. AFL-CIO President Rich Trumka says although the justices ruled on the right side of history, work remains in pursuit of equality. Trumka says continuing to address marriage equality is important, but other major issues for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered workers, like employment discrimination, must also be addressed. SEIU President Mary Kay Henry says the U.S. Supreme Court marriage equality decision is a huge cause for celebration for all Americans who care about equal justice under the law. Henry says by affirming that California's Prop 8 is unconstitutional, the U.S. Supreme Court also made it possible for Californians to have the right to marry whoever they choose. The 38,000 members of New York City's Transport Workers Union have embarked on a campaign of zero tolerance for diesel fumes and particulates, even as they are encountering diesel machinery more and more often in their work. Community members are suffering health impacts as well. WIN's Melinda Tuhus reports.
Dr. Frank Goldsmith, who directs occupational health for the TWU, Local 100, says not only buses and subways operate on diesel fuel, but a growing percentage of other machinery, like that used to clean equipment, even though battery-powered equipment is available.
So we've asked the Transit Authority, since all of our members use the same two insurance companies, to do a study of the medical insurance claims of lung cancer through the system, and they have steadfastly refused to do it.
Goldsmith adds that early intervention could save lives.
Lung cancer is usually detected in the stages 3 and 4, when it's almost hopeless to save the person's life. But if you find it in stages 1 and 2, you can eradicate the cancer and the person lives.
MTA spokesman Charles Seaton wrote in an email message that one union request was turned down due to employee privacy concerns, and he was not aware of any request to do a study of medical insurance claims pertaining to lung cancer. Peggy Shepard founded West Harlem Environmental Action, Inc., or WEACT, 25 years ago and serves as its executive director. Several years ago, WEACT conducted a study of 725 pregnant women in the community to assess the impact of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs.
We have seen that over 1/3 of the cohorted children have developmental delays, low birth weight, and small head circumference due to PAHs in diesel. As a result, we have been able to use that research and advocacy efforts over the years to get the MTA, the Metropolitan Transit Authority, to invest in hybrid diesel vehicles, compressed natural gas buses, as well as the early use of low sulfur fuel.
The Chicago Teachers Union and community allies protested education budget cuts Wednesday, picketing the Chicago Board of Education. They also protested at the Bank of America, which they say continues to gouge Chicago public schools and the city of Chicago with millions of dollars in financially toxic swap deals. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
When I have an asthma attack, I feel scared. It's kind of like an elephant is on my chest. I feel like I'm choking. Sometimes my parents have to take me to the hospital.
You know how to react to their asthma attacks. Here's how to prevent them. Call 1-866-NO-ATTACKS. Visit www.noattacks.org or call your doctor, because even one attack is one too many.
I feel like a fish with no water.
Brought to you by the EPA and the Ad Council.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. We are very excited to be speaking to our friend, Zack Ford, the editor for LGBT Think Progress. You can check it out at thinkprogress.org. You can follow him on Twitter at Zack Ford. Can we just start off, Zack, by saying congratulations. I know you have been working on this fight as well for a long time, and I'm thrilled to be speaking to you under such great circumstances.
I'm thrilled to be speaking under these circumstances too. And it's fun for me because my big start in blogging was when I covered the Prop 8 trial. I had the blessing of being unemployed at the time. So I sat and read the live transcripts from the courtroom all day long and processed and analyzed them. And that's actually what sort of got me noticed as a blogger and led to my career at Think Progress. So for me, it's a sort of special moment to kind of see that come full circle.
Yeah, I have to say that I was just thrilled that the Supreme Court ruled the way they did in both of these cases. And I was also thrilled to see that the Ninth Circuit struck down the barring of same-sex marriages in California. And on Friday, we saw the people responsible for getting the Prop 8 case before the court get married on live TV. I have goosebumps just thinking about it. Did you catch that wonderful, beautiful video?
I absolutely did, and of course got it up on Think Progress the first chance that I got to. They fought so hard, they waited so long for the opportunity to marry. They could have gone and gotten married in another state, but they didn't. They stayed with the fight, and they won. And so to see those two couples on live TV finally, proposing or finally marrying for life was just truly touching. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, I have to say I cried a little bit watching those videos in the best way.
I spent all week sort of like dug into the work and didn't ever get a chance to emotionally process. So last night when I watched that, I sort of bawled my eyes out a little bit.
So let's start off with DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act. It is now officially gone. What do you think the impact is for the future? I know we've already seen the Pentagon come out and extend benefits. The VA administration has come out. What sweeping impact do you think this is going to provide for LGBT citizens throughout our country?
Well, certainly that list is already growing in other ways at the national level. The Office of Personnel Management has already said all the benefits that they're going to offer to married same-sex partners of federal employees. HHS came out and said, look, this is a very clear strengthening for hospital visitation protections and things like that. But I think the bigger impact we're going to see is how it affects the state-by-state fight that we still have to continue. We already saw Friday a decision in Michigan. It was a preliminary injunction against the law that would ban domestic partner benefits from being offered. And the judge actually cited Windsor, the DOMA case. So he clearly probably already had his decision written, but he waited till he could cite Windsor. So we've already seen it as precedent in other cases. And then I think in states like New Jersey and Illinois and Hawaii that have civil unions, it's going to be really clear that those civil unions are much less equal than they were before this week. So there's a lot of stuff that we can play out there.
Now, in DOMA, the majority of the court ruled that this was a violation of the Fifth Amendment, the due process. And I think that plays into just what you were saying about how this is going to affect the state-by-state situation, because as the federal government is recognizing your right to federal benefits, there is a disparate, I can never say that word, disparate impact on people in states that don't recognize gay marriage. Do you think that's how it's going to play out, that they purposely did it that way to create that Fifth Amendment equal right argument in the states?
Well, Justice Kennedy tried to thread a pretty fine line in that he wanted to say that it's not just a federalism issue, right? It's not just that the federal government doesn't have purview over the issue of marriage. There really is a violation of equal protection, but there are a lot of things he didn't do that he could have. He could have said that, gays and lesbians should be addressed with higher scrutiny, which That's means true. That there's a different level of scrutiny that the laws have to meet to discriminate against gays and lesbians. What's kind of funny is he actually said same-sex couples. He didn't actually say gays and lesbians in the decision, so he kind of used that to thread the line. And of course, there's lots of jurisdictional questions that got in the way, but there's also sort of a thought that the Supreme Court did not rule on Prop 8 directly because they weren't ready to sort of impose marriage equality on all 50 states. And I actually thought Justice Scalia's opinion was interesting, not just because of all the offensive fun things he said, but because he called out the majority by saying, you could have done more and you're not. So what is that about? And I think that's true. So Justice Kennedy gave us something to work with, but he didn't go as far as he could have either. So
Right.
we'll get something out of it, but it's not clear what yet.
But the great thing is, and hi, Isaac, this is Shane here, that the Fifth Amendment applies to the federal, but there's the very same thing for the states under the 14th, the equal protection. So it's just a matter of saying, instead of talking about the federal government, we're talking about the state now. And if it's the 5th for the federal, then it's the 14th for the state. And it's just one more step, because that question wasn't really before the courts. And at some point it will be. So it's already laid out. And that's, I think, what Scalia was saying.
Absolutely, that's very true. And certainly the language that Kennedy gave us in the decision is very important, because he did talk about the fact that gay people exist, and more importantly, that they already have families. What I thought was so great that he included was that DOMA, he said, humiliates the tens of thousands of children already being raised by same-sex families. And that's the talking point that the right can never, ever, ever answer. They avoid that question, which is, what are you going to do about the tens of thousands of children already being raised in those families? You know, if marriage is about protecting children, why don't you want to protect all those children? They never have an answer for it. And Kennedy pretty much called them out on it and put it in the decision.
Yeah, I really loved his opinion and I think his specific call out to the movement and the inclusion of the word pride in his opinion several times, that, you know, equality is the pride of those states to recognize gay marriage, and it's a pride in recognizing their unions and recognizing equality. I mean, I felt like that language was deliberate. It was him directly addressing the equality movement and saying, you know, this is something we should be proud of as a nation, to extend civil rights to all people. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. You know, Justice Kennedy is a tough one to talk about, because he's written so many awful decisions in terms of the progressive community. But he's written all of the three big victories that we've had for gay rights. He wrote Romer, and he wrote Lawrence, and now he's written Windsor. And every single time he did less than he could have, but every single time he ruled the right way. So I do think we have to give him a little bit of credit for being on our side in that regard.
Absolutely. Now, in respect to Prop 8 and them essentially accepting the lower court's ruling that Prop 8 is unconstitutional, do you think that played into the court's recent decision to reject the two other cases from Arizona and Nevada, essentially saying that the lower court ruling in Arizona, barring state employees from domestic partner benefits should continue to be struck down, and that Nevada case should be argued in the Ninth Circuit, where Prop 8 was decided? Do you think that's all kind of related, their refusal to hear those two other cases?
Yes and no. I mean, the Arizona case was really still just about the injunction. They haven't actually argued the full case yet. So I'm pretty sure that's why they're like, just figure this out before you actually come to us with it. And the same with Nevada. Like, we're not just going to take the district court opinion. We want this to go through the steps before we address it. We just gave you a whole lot to work with. So see how you apply that and then get back to us. So we still might see them wind up there someday, but I think it makes sense that like they want to let what they just decided percolate a little bit before they come back to the issue again.
Now, I just want to remind everybody, we're speaking with Zack Ford, the LGBT editor for Think Progress. You can check it out at thinkprogress.org. You can follow him on Twitter at Zack Ford. I know we had so much to talk about in this interview that we only have a few minutes left, but I wanted to also mention the musical comedy Love New York that you are the musical director for, that is coming to DC very soon. And I really hope that everybody listening goes and checks this out. Can you tell us a little bit about Love New York?
Sure, and I greatly appreciate the plug, Danielle. So Love New York is a show that's part of the Capitol Fringe Festival, which is this amazing independent theater festival that we have here in DC. And we've been working really hard. My secret past life is as a music teacher, so I get to do some musical direction on the side. But we have an amazing, talented cast that has been rehearsing for several months. We only have 5 performances because that's one of the quirks of the Fringe Festival, but we debut in just a couple weeks. So it's it's an exciting time. That's actually been an extra layer to my week, right? I got back from Netroots Nation in San Jose, was super jet lagged. Then I had all of the craziness of DOMA this week, and then I've had rehearsals already, like 4 hours Thursday night, 4 hours last night. I was rushing off to rehearsal as the California thing happened last night, and I'm off to rehearsal again this afternoon. So it's been a busy and exciting time to have all that happening, but it's a great show, and I hope folks will come out to it.
I certainly hope so too. It looks like it's going to be amazing. Shane and I will be there. Just to let everybody know listening, you can check it out Saturday, July 13th, Tuesday, July 16th, Saturday, July 20th, Tuesday, the 23rd, and Friday, the 26th. We'll put all those times and links to the show and tickets up with the blog post. We will be there that Saturday, July 20th, supporting Zack, and we just want to be able to come and give you a hug. And this has been such an awesome time, and I'm really glad that we got to share a little bit of it with you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that plug. It means a lot.
Absolutely. Zack Ford, everybody. It doesn't get much better than this. Zack Ford, LGBT editor for Think Progress. Amazing stuff. Check out Love New York. Check out his great work at thinkprogress.org. And hopefully everybody comes out and sees the show. It's been an amazing week. It's been so much to follow. It's been emotionally grueling for some of us with the roller coaster of the Supreme Court's ruling on voting rights and then the amazing ruling on DOMA and Prop 8. We're going to get into the dichotomy of the Supreme Court voting against civil rights in one case and yet for civil rights in another in the very same week. We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. So you're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano, and we are going to be back with so much more. So stick around.
Confound it. You're right. It's brilliant.
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Say you want to go to college. Yay! A Big Ten college. But you don't want to feel like part of the, well, you know. Is there an answer for you? Of course. Indiana University East. Go Red Wolves! Indiana University East. You'll get the quality of a Big Ten education in a small college setting. IU East offers more than 50 fields of study, from accounting to political science, taught by internationally recognized faculty with an average of 18 students per class. So it's not, student number 95A-6273, please report to. It's more like, hey, John, welcome to class. Best of all, you'll graduate with one of the most respected degrees anywhere, a degree from IU. Don't wait. Go to iue.edu. or call 800-959-EAST to arrange a visit to Indiana University East. IU. Focused on you.
I had a sore in my mouth that just wouldn't go away. And after a couple of weeks, I went to my doctor.
A sore, lump, or thick patch in your mouth or throat could be a symptom of oral cancer.
My doctor told me I was smart to come in. He said that oral cancer is more common in African American men than in any other group in the U.S. It turns out I did have oral cancer, but it was caught early and my treatment was successful. I'm glad I got it checked. That probably saved my life.
If you're an African American man, you need to know about oral cancer. Visit a doctor or dentist if you see changes in your mouth that don't go away after 2 weeks. It's important to get an oral cancer exam, because if you do have cancer, the earlier it's caught, the better. A message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health.
Hank Action News is proud to be sponsored by Healthcare for America Now. HCAN is a national coalition of more than 1,000 groups in 50 states, representing 30 million people. HCAN works to promote, defend, implement, and improve the Affordable Care Act at both the state and federal levels. They also try to protect Medicare and Medicaid, increase corporate accountability, and confront forces that seek to take away critical services. HCAN believes in creating jobs, not cutting programs people depend on. HCAN runs comprehensive issue campaigns that mobilize people at the grassroots and define the public debate. HCAN is fighting to protect, implement, and improve the new health care law through national and state-based legislative and regulatory campaigns built on grassroots action, public education, communications, policy analysis, and groundbreaking research. HCAN has become a respected voice and national leader on healthcare while continuing to focus on aggressive field activity. Support HCAN, Healthcare for America Now.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
Does your child have difficulty controlling their anger or a history of academic failure in school? Options Public Charter School offers a therapeutic learning environment with small classroom sizes and on-site counseling services to help students succeed. Options PCS is now enrolling grades 5 through 11 for the upcoming school year. For more information, call Options PCS today at 202-547-1028. Options Public Charter School. Exceptional education for exceptional students.
See? It's easier than ever to listen to SoFlo. On the air and everywhere. On any computer, any mobile device, iPhone, iTouch, and anywhere you are, just hit SoFloRadio.com. Tell your friends about South Florida's radio network, SoFloRadio.com.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Thank you wherever you're checking us out, SoFlo Radio or We Act Radio, WPWC in Washington, D.C. Thanks again to Zack Ford. He is amazing, the LGBT editor for Think Progress. But these cases, DOMA and Prop 8, kind of left so many people in the country like,
what's next?
Yeah,
what does this mean?
What does that mean for me? I'm in a state that maybe doesn't recognize gay marriage, or worse, has banned it or put some horrible constitutional amendment in. What does that mean for me now that it's legal federally and Prop 8 was really just struck to California?
Right. Well, we saw what it means in California. And right at first in California, we're like, well, how long is it going to take? Well, actually, when the decision first came out, there were a lot of people confused. Like, well, they didn't rule on it, so what does it mean? And we found out as that went on that what the Supreme Court did is they said Ninth Circuit, who actually ruled in favor of striking down Prop 8 as well.
Right.
There wasn't standing there either, so your judgment is vacated. Oh, and by the way, Ninth Circuit dismissed the appeal because there wasn't standing, so what was left standing was the federal decision. And the federal decision said that Prop 8 is unconstitutional, that the constitutional amendment to define marriages between one man and one woman was unconstitutional. Therefore, same-sex marriages could go forward, gay and lesbian marriages. And there was supposed to be like a certain number of days before.
25 days.
There's like the Supreme Court ruling has to be officially sent to them. I don't know if it comes on a stork. What does it come on? A Pony Express, whatever. By the way, we could have it. We got it about 30 seconds later online. So Kamala, is it Harris?
Yes.
Attorney General of the state of California, I guess, pushed it forward and said, come on, what are you waiting for? So they issued the Ninth Circuit issued a
one-line ruling.
Yeah, do you have it?
The stay in the above matter is dissolved effective immediately. That was the whole ruling.
Well, because essentially the stay was that the first court ruled it unconstitutional, but we're going to stay it for appeal. And the Ninth Circuit said, we ruled unconstitutional. So at that point, even before the Supreme Court spoke, it was at that point unconstitutional according to the courts, but they stayed that, saying, don't do any marriages yet till we get this to the Supreme Court. So all they had to do was lift the stay. They lift the stay, and away they went. So now we know what what Prop 8 means. Same-sex couples, California, get married. Go for it. Have fun and have a great life. And that's cool. Now, DOMA is much more significant in terms of conflicts of law. And I was getting texts from friends, family, et cetera. What does this mean? Can I do this? Can I do that? And the thing is there's a lot of those situations, there's not easy answers yet.
Right.
And it's interesting that during the arguments from both sides, they were both complaining that it's going to be really complicated no matter which way the court rules. And sure enough, it is. because all the states really shouldn't be discriminating either. And we'll get there. I'm more sure than ever that we will get there. But in the meantime, you have hundreds of thousands of people saying, what does this mean to me? Now, we're starting to sort through it when it comes to the Defense Department. There's 1,100 or so federal laws that each have their own language in them. For example, when it comes to Social Security benefits, how do those get apportioned? And that's based on where you're domiciled, not where you celebrated your nuptials. So if you're living in a state that accepts that recognizes same-sex marriage, then Social Security is fine. If you don't, because you're not domiciled, so that one's one way. The IRS, we don't know.
Right.
For example, you have a valid marriage from the state of California, but you live in Nevada. Can you still file a joint federal tax return because the federal government's supposed to recognize this because you have a legal marriage that, while isn't recognized by Nevada, it is recognized by California? Because the Supreme Court the decision just said married in a state. What is in a state?
Right. Is that the state
living.
you reside in,
Is
or
it
did you
domiciled,
drive to California, get married, and come back to your home in Nevada?
Right. So what has to be determined is whether it's going to be place of domicile or place of celebration. And that will get sorted out by all of the agencies who write these. And what they'll do is they're going to put essentially opinions or directives, or this is how we're going to handle it. The IRS will be doing this, and countless agencies will be doing this, and then we'll know.
Right.
And then if you don't like them, if they are too restrictive in some situations, then that opens the door for litigation so that they can be settled for equality.
Right, because this is going to, just how, Windsor, the DOMA case.
Right.
It got before the Supreme Court. How this case started was over taxes, over what somebody, they should not have been subject to taxes because legally they were married in the state they lived in, but the federal government couldn't recognize it. Well,
they're married and her spouse passed away, and she wanted to take the surviving spouse exemption on the estate tax.
Right.
And the IRS said, no, you can't because of DOMA.
Well, wouldn't this gray area, this federally under tax law, I should get one benefit, but my state deprives me of that benefit, doesn't that create almost a micro version of that same issue?
Yeah.
And thus, there's now Supreme Court ruling that says that violates the Fifth Amendment. That violates right to...
Or the 14th Amendment would be. Yeah, and those cases will come up. But in the meantime, there's going to be situations in which it seems completely wacky.
Okay.
This is a transition phase where things are not going to make sense. They're going to be unequal still because there are states who are not treating same-sex couples equally, and those will have to be litigated, debated by those states, decided in those states, and then the constitutionality needs to be tested, and then it will work its way out. Because it's confusing, that's okay. It will get resolved. And the quicker, the better. And I think I'd rather it be this confusing this way than someone being in New York saying the federal government doesn't recognize it, but my state does. You know what I'm saying? This is progress.
Yeah.
Now, and more states will come on board saying, doing same-sex marriage, so it'll become less and less of a problem in fewer and fewer states. And then we'll get to the tougher states, and it'll have to be constitutional challenges, I'm thinking.
And I think that because, of course, the anti-gay marriage people, like the people who brought Prop 8, are furious over this ruling. But I think as they try and push too hard, push back on these rulings, on this precedent, I think...
How can they push back? They have no standing. Because the court told them, you aren't injured by this,
well,
which I love.
What they're saying, and this is in response to that Ninth Circuit ruling that we were just talking about in California, the quote, the stay in the above matter is dissolved effectively, immediately. The Prop 8 people are furious about this because technically the Supreme Court has a 25-day period
so they can appeal,
which they can try and ask the court to reconsider their opinion. And so they're furious that the state of California is going on with these marriages despite that.
The thing is the stay is at the discretion of the court below.
Right.
And for example, the Ninth Circuit could have ruled their way, and by the way, you don't get a stay while you appeal to the Supreme Court. So their injury is only because the court decided a certain way, and you can't sue because you don't like the way the court.
Right. I'm saying that I think that this effort is going to backfire on them as they try and challenge these laws and pursue these laws in other states. We now have Supreme Court precedent that says it's not right to discriminate against these people.
We need to take a break. We have much more time to talk
my
about this.
goodness.
Yeah, we'll take a break and we get back and we'll talk about more of it.
All right. You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. One great more guest coming up, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.